He walked into the courtroom expecting just another trial, another name, another case, another man accused. But when the judge looked up and locked eyes with the defendant, his heart stopped. This wasn't just any man. It was his childhood friend, the boy he once played with, laughed with, and dreamed alongside. Yet now, that same friend was standing in chains, facing a system that had crushed so many lives before his. How could two boys who started in the same place end up here, on opposite sides of justice? And what unfolded next would leave the entire courtroom in stunned silence. Subscribe and join our community. Before the courtroom silence, there was just a boy named Marcus. He grew up in a small neighborhood where laughter echoed through cracked sidewalks, and dreams were painted bigger than the walls that confined them. He was smart, curious, and always the first to share his last piece of candy with a friend. One of those friends was Daniel, the judge's son. Back then, no one cared about skin color on the playground. They only cared about who could run faster, who could climb higher, who could dream the loudest. But life outside those games wasn't so simple. As Marcus grew older, the world around him began to shift. Teachers doubted his abilities. Store owners watched him suspiciously, and police cars seemed to slow whenever he walked by. For Daniel, doors opened easily. Scholarships, mentorships, opportunities. For Marcus, doors slammed shut just as quickly as they appeared. Still, Marcus pushed forward, holding on to the same hope he carried as a child. But society had already placed him in a box he never asked for. And years later, that box led him here, into the very courtroom where his childhood friend, Daniel, now sat as the judge. Two boys, same start, different paths. And as Marcus stood in chains, the unspoken question lingered in the air. Was this fate, or the result of a system designed to break him? Marcus never set out to break the law. He set out to survive. After high school, when scholarships never came and job interviews ended with polite rejections, he picked up part-time work where he could. But no matter how hard he tried, it always felt like the world was stacked against him. When Daniel went off to college, with honors, Marcus was stopped and searched by police on his way to the grocery store. When Daniel entered law school, Marcus was turned away from jobs because of his address or the color of his skin. The gap widened year after year. Two boys once equal, now standing on opposite ends of society's divide. Then came the night everything changed. Marcus was walking home when flashing lights lit up the street. He hadn't stolen anything, hadn't broken a law. Yet officers swarmed him, accusing him of fitting a description. Their words carried weight, but their eyes carried judgment. He tried to explain, tried to stay calm, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of handcuffs snapping shut. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus found himself buried in charges he couldn't fight. He didn't have money for a top lawyer, no powerful connections to pull strings. The case built against him was thin, but in a system designed to punish men like him, thin was often enough. Meanwhile, Daniel had no idea. He was busy preparing for his next trial, his next ruling, his next step in a career built on the belief that justice was blind. But justice wasn't blind. It was looking the other way. And when Marcus finally entered that courtroom, wearing the orange uniform that marked him as guilty before the trial even began, he lifted his head and met the eyes of the judge. Daniel froze. The gavel felt heavy in his hand. His childhood friend was now the man accused. But this was only the beginning. Because the choice Daniel made next would not only decide Marcus's fate, It would test the very foundation of justice itself. Sathi, courtroom air grew heavier with every word spoken. The prosecutor painted Marcus as a threat, a repeat offender, someone the community should fear. Each sentence landed like a hammer, shaping the image of a man Marcus had never been. The jury watched in silence, absorbing every accusation, while Marcus sat powerless, his life reduced to a story written by someone else. Daniel's hands trembled beneath the bench. He remembered the boy who once dreamed of becoming a teacher, the boy who stayed after school to help others with homework, the boy who had shared his last piece of candy without hesitation. And now, chains, accusations, and a system eager to label him guilty before the truth was even spoken. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice cracked, not from weakness, but from carrying years of being unheard. I didn't do this. I've been judged my whole life for things I never did. This isn't justice. His words echoed, but the silence that followed was louder. Daniel's gavel felt heavier than stone. He was torn between the duty of a judge and the truth staring back at him in Marcus's eyes. If he followed the system blindly, Marcus's life would be swallowed whole. But if he acknowledged what he saw, what he knew deep down, it would mean challenging everything. The BT courtroom stood on. The room waited. The jury, the lawyers, even Marcus, all eyes locked on Daniel. He could either look away, as so many had before, or confront the ugly truth of what was unfolding in his courtroom. And in that moment, the judge realized this decision would not only define Marcus's future, it would define his own humanity. The ID gavel finally struck, but it didn't sound like justice. It sounded like a reckoning. Daniel took a breath and did what many before him had failed to do. He acknowledged the cracks in the very system he served. Instead of rushing to sentence, he demanded a deeper review of the evidence, exposing flaws that had been buried under assumptions and prejudice. For Marcus, it meant a chance, not freedom handed down as a gift, but a fair fight in a system that rarely offered one. But the impact of that moment went far beyond the verdict. In the silence that followed, the courtroom felt something it hadn't in a long time: accountability. People saw, perhaps for the first time, that racism doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through bias, paperwork, and quiet decisions. That change lives forever. For Daniel, the case became more than personal. It became a mirror. He had risen on the strength of doors that opened easily, while Marcus had been crushed by doors slammed shut. And now, standing on opposite sides, he realized justice was never truly blind. It was only blind to those it chose to ignore. Marcus's story is not unique. His face could belong to millions who have walked into courtrooms already branded guilty, their voices drowned out by a system too quick to judge. The tragedy is not that this happened once, it's that it keeps happening. So, the question remains: how many more chains, how many more lives, before silence finally breaks into change? If this story touched you, don't just watch, be part of the change. Hit subscribe and join our community of voices that matter.